Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the world of vitamin D3. And wow, the stuff you sent in is fascinating. There's even some stuff that's a little controversial.
For sure. We've got excerpts from Jeff T. Bowles' book, articles on everything from calcium deficiency to obesity, even personal testimonials. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in vitamin D3.
Definitely a lot of strong opinions out there too.
Sure.
So our mission today, well, we're going to unpack these different perspectives, explore the science, and hopefully help you figure out what it all means for you. One of the first things that jumped out at me was vitamin D3. It's not just some basic vitamin, right?
You're spot on there. It's actually a steroid hormone, which means it acts on pretty much every cell in your body. And get this, it can actually influence how your genes express themselves.
Wait, genes. Okay, so we're not just talking about strong bones here.
Yeah.
This is way more complicated than I thought.
Absolutely. Think of vitamin D3 like a key, unlocking specific instructions in your DNA, and those instructions, they tell your cells how to function, which then affects everything, like your immune system and even your mood.
Okay, now you've got my attention. So what about this human hibernation syndrome that Bowles talks about? Is he serious? Are we all just bears in disguise ready to sleep through the winter?
Not quite, though it is a pretty interesting way to think about it. Bowles' theory is that, our bodies still have this ancient response to low vitamin D3 levels. Think of it like an energy-saving mode that kicks in when there's less sunlight.
So those cravings for comfort food we get during winter and the low energy, you're saying that might not just be a coincidence?
That's the idea. Imagine our ancestors thousands of years ago. Low sunlight meant winter was coming, and winter meant famine. So their bodies would go into this energy-saving mode to survive on whatever limited resources they could find.
It's crazy to think that something that primal could still be affecting us today. But how does that explain things like obesity or getting the flu?
Well, according to Bowles, those modern-day problems might actually be remnants of that ancient survival mechanism, just kind of going haywire in today's world. We've got artificial light, central heating, grocery stores full of food all year round. Our bodies might be getting some very mixed signals.
So even with full fridges and warm homes, our bodies are acting like we're about to face a famine any minute. That's pretty wild.
It is. It really makes you wonder, does our modern lifestyle unintentionally mimic those winter conditions? And is that why we have some of these health problems?
That's a great question. And speaking of things that make you wonder, Bowles also talks about this incomplete repair syndrome. Is it as painful as it sounds?
Not in the way you might think. What Bowles is suggesting is when your vitamin D3 is low, your body might put short-term survival over long-term repairs. It's like patching things up just enough to get by instead of going for a complete fix.
So like putting a Band-Aid on a sprained ankle and hoping for the best.
Well, maybe not that extreme, but you get the idea. Bowles actually shares the story about how he started feeling pain and some old injuries. When he upped his vitamin D3 intake, he believes his body was finally able to finish those repairs, the ones that had been on hold.
This is where I start to get a little skeptical. Is there any science to back this up? Or is this just a good story?
Well, there have actually been studies, particularly looking at bone healing in rats. And those studies showed that when the rats were given vitamin D3, they had more complete repairs. The rats who got D3, their bones healed up beautifully. But the ones that didn't get enough D3, their bones didn't heal as well.
That's really interesting. But rats aren't humans. So does that really translate to us?
That's a great question. And yeah, more research is definitely needed. But it does make you think, right? Do you have any old aches and pains? Any old injuries that never quite healed right? Maybe low vitamin D3 levels could be playing a role.
I'm definitely thinking about my old knee injury differently now. But Bowles doesn't stop there, does he? He links vitamin D3 deficiency to a ton of serious diseases.
He does. From autoimmune disorders to heart disease, the list is pretty long. It's definitely a bold claim, but let's look at some specific examples that might be relevant for you. Have you ever had anything like asthma, allergies, or skin conditions?
Actually, I had asthma as a kid. It is pretty interesting to think that there might be a connection to something like vitamin D3.
It is, but we have to be careful here. Just because there might be a connection doesn't mean low vitamin D3 actually causes these diseases. There could be other factors involved. We need more solid scientific evidence to say for sure.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is in order. Speaking of skepticism, didn't some study find a link between lower vitamin D3 levels and longer lifespan? I vaguely remember reading something like that.
You've got a great memory. That study definitely shook things up, even for Bowles himself. It seems to contradict everything we've been talking about. How could less vitamin D3 be linked to living longer?
Exactly. It doesn't make much sense.
What's fascinating is that this finding could actually be related to evolution and how different populations adapted to their environments over time. It might not be as straightforward as more vitamin D3 is always better.
So is it possible that people who evolved in places with more sun, with darker skin, they might not need as much vitamin D3 as people who evolved in less sunny places?
Exactly. Their bodies might have adapted to thrive on lower vitamin D3 levels. This study really highlights the fact that we need to consider individual differences. What works for one person might not work for another.
That's a good reminder that we're all unique. But this brings up another question. Bowles talks about taking massive doses of vitamin D3, like 50,000, even 100,000 IUs a day. That honestly sounds kind of scary. Are there any risks?
I get it. Those are very high doses, way beyond what's typically recommended. Bowles does mention pregnant women taking these high doses with no problems, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for everyone.
Definitely not something I'd try without talking to my doctor first.
Yeah.
What does the science say about vitamin D3 toxicity?
The good news is that true toxicity is actually pretty rare, and it usually only happens with super high doses over a really long period. But it's still important to be aware of the risks. Bowles actually talks about something called vitamin K2 as being really important for reducing those risks.
Vitamin K2. I'm not familiar with that one. What does it do?
Well, vitamin K2 helps to make sure that calcium goes to your bones and keeps it from building up in your soft tissues, which is one of the concerns with high-dose vitamin D3. Think of it like a traffic cop for calcium, making sure it goes where it's supposed to.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you're taking a lot of D3, you should also be taking K2.
It's definitely worth discussing with your doctor. They can help you figure out the right balance for you. And even with K2, the whole optimal D3 dosage question is still a bit of a mystery. Bowles even experimented with different doses himself, and he had some side effects, like joint pain and sleeping more. But what worked for him might not be right for everyone else.
Right, everyone's different. So how are we supposed to figure out the right amount? Is there like a magic number?
Unfortunately, no. The most reliable way to figure out your optimal vitamin D3 levels is through personalized blood testing. That takes out the guesswork and lets you fine-tune your intake to your specific needs.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like getting a snapshot of what's going on inside your body. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored these fascinating theories about hibernation and incomplete repairs, considered the potential benefits and risks, and even touched on the evolutionary stuff. It's starting to feel like a detective story, piecing together clues to solve the mystery of vitamin D3.
Exactly. And speaking of clues, let's move on to another piece of the puzzle: sunlight, skin color, and how it all connects to D3 production.
That's right. We can get vitamin D3 from the sun. But how does our skin color play into all of this?
Well, you can think of your skin like a natural sun filter. Darker skin pigmentation offers more protection from UV radiation, which is great for avoiding sunburn, but it also means you need more time in the sun. To make the same amount of vitamin D3 as someone with lighter skin.
So someone with pale skin might need less time in the sun to make enough D3, while someone with darker skin would need more time.
Exactly. And Bowles makes this interesting observation about obesity rates. He noticed that they tend to increase as you move further away from the equator, especially in populations with darker skin. He thinks it could be related to how humans evolved in different parts of the world.
Okay, I'm curious, how would that work?
People who evolved in those sunny equatorial regions, they didn't need to be as efficient at converting sunlight to vitamin D3. Their bodies were already getting plenty. But as humans migrated to places with less sun further from the equator, people with darker skin might have had a harder time getting enough D3. It's possible this contributed to those hibernation-like tendencies we talked about earlier.
This is making me rethink that whole avoid the sun at all costs message we always hear. It seems like there's a balance, right, between getting enough sun for vitamin D3 and protecting ourselves from too much sun.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot. And that sweet spot is probably different for everyone, depending on their genetics, their lifestyle, where they live.
Okay, so we've explored Bowles' theories about hibernation and incomplete repairs, talked about the potential benefits and risks of D3 supplements, and even dug into the evolutionary side of things, like skin color and sunlight. This deep dive is really living up to its name.
We have covered a lot, but there's still more to uncover. We haven't even gotten to Bowles' personal journey of healing, or the amazing stories from people who saw improvements in their health with high-dose D3 therapy, or the controversy surrounding vitamin D3 in the pharmaceutical industry.
It sounds like we've only scratched the surface, so.
To be continued.
Absolutely. We'll pick up right where we left off in part 2 of this vitamin D3 deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into vitamin D3. Last time we were talking about all sorts of things, from like ancient hibernation theories to how D3 actually works in our bodies. It's been pretty wild so far. I'm really interested to hear more about those personal stories we mentioned earlier. Bowles claims he basically healed himself of a bunch of different things just by taking more vitamin D3. But like we said, personal stories aren't always the most reliable, right?
You're right, personal stories don't replace scientific studies, but they can be really helpful, especially when they kind of line up with the research or when they give us new ideas to investigate. So Bowles' experience, even if it's not like definitive proof, it definitely adds to our understanding of vitamin D3.
So let's break it down. What were those specific issues that Bowles said he got rid of with high-dose D3?
Well, remember how he was already taking like 4,000 IUs a day, which is 10 times the recommended dose, and he still had those problems, like that clicking in his hip and the yellow toenails and that ganglion cyst on his wrist?
Right, those things that just wouldn't go away, even with that high dose.
Exactly. That's what made him want to try even higher doses. He bumped it up to 20,000 IUs and eventually even more.
Wow, those are some serious numbers. We should probably say here that we're not recommending anyone do that without talking to their doctor.
Definitely. This is just about understanding Bowles' experience, not encouraging anyone to experiment on themselves. But what Bowles describes is he felt this surge of energy, almost like a boost of testosterone, which he thinks is because of, the hormonal nature of vitamin D3.
Interesting. And he also mentioned pain in his joints, especially the ones with old injuries, like his body was finally able to do those repairs.
Right. And remember that study with the rats we talked about, where D3 actually helped their bones heal more completely? That kind of supports Bowles' idea. He even compares it to the rats with perfectly healed bones compared to the ones that didn't get enough D3, who had those imperfections in their bones.
Okay, so maybe there is something to this incomplete repair syndrome. But what about the other things? Did the hip clicking go away? The yellow toenails?
According to Bowles, yeah, he saw improvement in all of those things. Even the ganglion cyst, it shrunk down a lot.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. But couldn't it be just a placebo effect? Sometimes just believing something will work can have a big impact.
That's true. We can't rule that out. But Bowles had already seen some improvements with 4,000 IUs, remember? Like his arthritis pain went away mostly, so it wasn't like he was starting from scratch.
True. This wasn't his first time trying D3. But let's move on to those other people who tried high-dose D3. I'm curious to hear their stories.
Well, they all had different experiences, but the common thread is they were all dealing with some health problems that conventional medicine hadn't really fixed, and they decided to see if vitamin D3 could help.
So it sounds like they were kind of desperate, ready to try anything new.
Yeah, and it's important to note that a lot of them made the decision to try high-dose D3 on their own, without their doctor specifically telling them to.
Which really shows how important it is to take charge of our own health, do our own research, and have these conversations with our doctors. It's about being informed and making the choices that feel right for us.
For sure. So let's dive into some of those stories.
Well, there's Janelle. She had, a whole bunch of problems. Lupus, adrenal fatigue, even hair loss. She says high-dose D3 helped her get her energy back, healed her skin, and even made her hair grow back.
Her story is really interesting because she had so many different issues, from autoimmune stuff to hormonal problems to skin problems. It really shows how wide-ranging the effects of vitamin D3 might be.
And then there's Don Carroll, who had really bad psoriasis. He said nothing seemed to help until he tried high-dose D3. He claims that, along with a healthy diet, it completely cleared up his psoriasis.
He also mentioned that his joint pain got better and he was sleeping better. It kind of echoes what Bowles experienced, and it supports the idea that D3 does more than we thought.
It's almost like a ripple effect, right? You fix one thing with D3 and it starts to make other things better.
Yeah, that's a cool way to think about it. But we also have to remember that not everyone had good experiences. Some people had side effects like a racing heart or headaches, which they thought were caused by the K2 they were taking with the D3.
Right. We talked about K2 being important for preventing calcium buildup, but it sounds like even with K2, you have to be careful to get the right amount.
You got it. Too little K2, and you risk those calcium deposits. Too much, and you might get those unpleasant side effects. It's just another example of why it's so important to talk to your doctor and get their advice on what's right for you.
This is a lot to think about. It's kind of overwhelming, honestly. How do we even make sense of all this information?
You're right, it can be. That's why it's so important to be critical, do your own research, and talk to your doctor. Don't just blindly follow what anyone says, even someone like Bowles.
It's about figuring out what works for each of us based on our own needs and situations.
Exactly. And that's what makes these deep dives so great. It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about giving you the tools to ask the right questions and make your own decisions.
Okay, so we've talked about personal experiences with high-dose D3, both good and bad. There's definitely potential there, but also some risks. But there's another big piece of this we haven't talked about yet, the whole conflict of interest thing between the pharmaceutical industry and D3 supplements.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. Are we going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole? Is Big Pharma hiding the truth about vitamin D3 to make more money?
It's a question a lot of people have, and Bowles definitely brings it up. He mentions examples of the pharmaceutical industry, downplaying natural remedies that could potentially hurt their profits.
It makes you think, for sure. And we can't just ignore those concerns. We've seen similar things happen with other natural remedies. Like, remember how information about the benefits of cannabis for certain medical conditions was suppressed for years?
So are we supposed to believe that Big Pharma is trying to keep us in the dark about the benefits of sunshine?
Well, I think we need to be nuanced here. It's true that the pharmaceutical industry wants to make money, of course. But it's also a really big and complicated system with a lot of different people and motivations.
So it's not as simple as saying the whole industry is evil.
Exactly. There are lots of ethical researchers and companies out there who really do care about helping people. But we also can't pretend that profit doesn't play a role in what research gets done and what treatments doctors recommend.
That makes sense. So how do we navigate all of this? How do we figure out what's true and what's not?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It takes critical thinking, being skeptical, and being willing to look at things from different angles. We can't just accept everything we hear as fact, no matter who's saying it, whether it's some health guru or a big pharmaceutical company.
It's about doing our own research, looking at the evidence, and talking to our doctors.
Right, exactly. And that's what these deep dives are all about. We're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to give you the information you need to make your own decisions.
We've covered so much in this vitamin D3 deep dive. We've talked about how it's actually a hormone, the possible benefits and risks, the importance of personalized advice, and even that whole controversy with the pharmaceutical industry.
It's been quite a journey. And as we wrap up this part, we want to leave you with something to think about. Think about how our modern lifestyle affects our vitamin D3 levels.
Right. We spend most of our time inside, under artificial light, covered in sunscreen. Could that be part of the reason why so many people have chronic diseases? Are we accidentally making ourselves deficient in vitamin D3?
It's a question worth asking, and it shows how important it is to keep doing research, keep digging deeper, and keep exploring.
Well, it definitely sounds like there's a lot more to learn. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on this incredible journey exploring vitamin D3, and it's safe to say we've uncovered more questions than answers.
That's what happens when you really dive deep into something. It's not about finding all the answers. It's about getting curious and hopefully inspiring you to keep learning about this stuff long after this deep dive is over.
Exactly. We've given you a bunch of different perspectives and hopefully enough information to help you make some good choices about your health, especially when it comes to vitamin D3.
Right. So as we wrap things up, what are the key takeaways? What are the things you should really remember from all of this?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that vitamin D3 is so much more than just a vitamin. It's a powerful hormone, and it affects pretty much every cell in your body.
Right. And it could have way more benefits than we originally thought. From your immune system and your mood to your metabolism. Vitamin D3 seems to play a role in so many different things.
But as amazing as those benefits sound, we can't forget about the risks, especially when you're taking high doses of D3.
Absolutely. Toxicity is rare, but it can happen. And figuring out the right dose for you is still a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of conflicting information out there.
That's why we talked about how important it is to get personalized advice. Get blood tests and talk to your doctor.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you, not just blindly following someone else's advice.
We also talked about that fascinating evolutionary angle, how skin color and sun exposure and even our modern lifestyle affect the way our bodies handle vitamin D3. It really shows how different we all are.
And this deep dive has really challenged us to think critically about the information we come across, to question what we think we know, and to be open to different perspectives.
It's a good reminder that learning is a never-ending process.
There's always more to learn, more to explore.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive into vitamin D3, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, I like it. Hit us with it.
If we're spending so much time indoors under artificial light, wearing sunscreen, What's that doing to our vitamin D3 levels in the long run?
Good question.
Could this be a contributing factor to all these chronic diseases we're seeing?
Yeah, are we unintentionally making ourselves vitamin D3 deficient?
It's definitely something to think about.
It just highlights how much more research we need to do. We need more deep dives, more exploration to really understand the full story of vitamin D3 and its impact on our health.
So keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of vitamin D3.